I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm not speaking meaningfully about anything, okay? Because I don't know what the words I'm using are referencing.
And another one. Okay. You're on a short leash as well, Billy. You're on stage. Go ahead.
Well, I was wondering if you like formalized an argument for like Christianity or something like that. Because I
Yeah.
wasn't like tracking, like I wasn't tracking the argument the last time. So like, if you have like, I don't know,
Yeah, we just talked about
premises or
this.
conclusion or something.
Yeah, we just talked about this. We're talking about a being that's ultimate, that secures all intelligibility, rationality, knowledge, etc. That's ultimate, omniscient, omnipotent, always truth revealing. These are the properties, essential properties of the Christian God that are essential to him.
And what's the argument that that being exists?
Yeah, because the fact that a being is revelatory, or let's start with the fact that it's ultimate and eternal. That is a required characteristic of being ultimate, or sorry, of being of securing intelligibility and rationality. Because in a world wherein such a thing does not exist, first of all, such a thing wouldn't be possible because everything that is putative or putatively exists, or any putative state of affairs that could be invoked, would be born out of absolutely nothing. It would just be spontaneous, random, without any rhyme or reason whatsoever. Okay, in such a world, again, where there is no ultimate foundation, which is one of the properties of the Christian God, then it would not exist. And by it, I'm saying knowledge, rationality, uh, that kind of thing, etc. Right? That God grounds, and that He's a prerequisite for it. Okay, you understand that?
Oh, sorry, I just closed the app down for a sec. Yeah.
Did you hear what I said?
Hey, what's up? Um, so there has to be some like being that's ultimate. Uh, because that the being, um, will be the source of things that are possible and impossible, and whatever is possible or impossible is made true in virtue of that being.
Did you hear what I said?
Yeah, I'm trying to
I
recapitulate
didn't
what you
invoke the
said in
word
my own words.
possibility and what I just said.
Okay, well maybe you can repeat. Sorry, I'm doing two
Yeah.
things at
When
once.
we're
I'm
talking
listening
about
to.
a being that's ultimate, I'm gonna lay this out very clearly for you, okay? When we say that God is ultimate, okay, when we say that God is eternal, we're saying that God is the source and basis of all things. Okay, all things derive and depend upon Him, and um, he's going to be the metaphysical starting point or metaphysical basis for all things. Okay, the reason why that's required, we can take a look at the consequence of that not being the case, and establish that God is transcendently necessary in order for the things that we're talking about to be the case. If there was no such thing, if there was no ultimate metaphysical starting point, metaphysical grounding, if that such thing were not to be, that everything that could be stated to have exist, and I put that in quotes, okay, as if there were any states of affairs that could have come into existence, any and every state of affairs under that kind of a worldview, in that metaphysical void, would be born out of chance, would be born out of randomness. There would be no rhyme or reason fundamentally as to how or why anything is at all. Okay, and so that would destroy intelligibility, causality, etc. Because things like causality, continuity, relationships between facts depends upon there being preconditions, and that there is something that's foundational that is tying it together.
Do you have like a premises and conclusion so I can like get it sort of like
Did you understand what I just said?
clear in my mind?
Did you understand what I
Uh,
just said?
I mean, it seems like an appeal to consequence. Like if you're saying that there has to be
It's
something
not an appeal to
ultimate,
consequence.
otherwise,
It's not an appeal to consequence. Do you understand? Do you understand what I'm asking, or what I'm establishing here? That there needs to be something that's foundational and ultimate in order for there to be intelligibility and knowledge and rationality, etc. Because
what's the argument for that?
rationality depends upon preconditions, like the fact that there is continuity, relationships between facts or states of affairs, causality, etc. If those things exist, right, then there's going to be something that's foundational and fundamental that is going to provide the background or the foundation upon which those things stand, right? Because otherwise, if that were not the case, then what we'd be left with is a world wherein everything that happens emanates out of chaos or out of a metaphysical vacuum, wherein there are these states of affairs that come in and or out of existence that have no relation or connectivity between any other states of affairs. Okay, only in a world wherein there is a foundational basis by which everything else exists, okay, can there and will there be continuity, relationships, etc.
Okay. So. Oh shit! I've only got like, I guess 15 minutes. Can I just ask a few questions?
Did you understand what I said?
I think most of it. Yeah. I just
Okay,
wanted to ask.
do you accept what I said?
Yeah, sure, whatever. Can I ask a
We're
question or
not going to
two?
play that game. Do you accept what I said? Yes or no?
Yes, I accept what you said. Can I ask a question or two?
Okay,
Do you
go ahead.
deny that there are brute facts?
Brute facts that have absolutely no attestation or explanation at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, everything is derivative and dependent upon God.
So there are some facts. So every fact, everything that occurs has some explanation. Is that it?
They're not necessarily external explanations, but God, I don't know if I'd say God explains himself, but God is simply that which is foundational and the anchor point. So there's no outside realm that God exists within.
Sure. Okay.
So God would not be
What
considered some like brute fact, as though
what
he exists within
explains?
an external metaphysical context.
Sure. What explains God's desire to create the universe in such a way that it is?
He does.
So God explains his own desire?
Yeah.
I mean, like, I'm not sure if that's like an explanation. I mean, if I
Okay.
say that sort of like I
I
explain
mean, if
my
you're
own
gonna ask me like
desire.
the inner workings of God's mind, I can't answer those kind of questions for you, unfortunately. But
Oh, sure, sure.
baseline,
I'm
God is going
looking.
to be the source of God is going to be the source of all of his actions, and in fact, because I hold to divine simplicity, I would say that God's actions are identical to himself. So,
Sure. I mean, God
God
could
is
have
God. Yeah,
created a. Yeah, I mean, but I mean, I'm looking at, for example, I'm looking at a tree right now, and presumably God created the universe such that there was a tree that I'm looking at rather than not a tree that I'm looking at, or rather than two trees I'm looking at because I'm looking at one tree. And God presumably had that desire for that tree to be there rather than not be there. So it just seems like there has to be, if you're saying there are no brute facts, then there has to be something that
God is
explains
identical to his
why that
desires.
tree
Okay,
is
so
there.
all of those things, all of those things
Necessary.
are just foundational to all of reality.
Sure, I just want to finish though. I mean, presumably there has to be some explanation because you're saying there's no brute facts. Presumably there has to be some explanation as to why God created the universe with one tree there as opposed to no trees or two trees. And if there is some explanation, like God had the desire to create the universe such that there is one tree there as opposed to zero or two, well, what explains God's desire? Did he have the desire to create two trees? Did he have the desire to have the desire to have the desire to have two trees? I mean, it seems like it's either just going to be chance, like God just happens to have this desire as opposed to not having that desire, or it's just going to be necessary, right?
Yeah,
That
again, I'm going to explain this to
God
you again,
can't.
Billy. You're having the improper conceptualization of God here. Okay, you're conceptualizing of God as though
Where's
he
the error in my
exists
reasoning?
within. I'm explaining it to you, Billy. You're having the conception of God wherein he exists within another realm. Like for example, when you invoke chance, as though there are this realm in which God exists. God exists as one particular thing in that realm, amongst other things, amongst other, as you put them, possibilities. When that's simply not the case. Okay, God is going to be the metaphysical basis and grounds, the fundamental anchor point for all other states of affairs. Okay,
So
so
are you saying
to invoke things that are independent of God, that in a realm external to God that God is beholden to and that He exists in, is
I'm not
faulty
saying anything.
because that's not the proper conceptualization of God. Yes,
I'm
yes, it
not
is. When
saying
you invoke
anything.
things like chance and that there's some sort of randomness aspect to that, that is a improper conceptualization of God.
Okay. So you're saying that God's desires are necessary. They can't have been any other way. That God had to have had the desire to create that tree there. It can't have been any other way.
I'm not saying anything about necessity. I'm saying that
Then
God,
is it
you're not able
chance?
to,
Is it chance or
listen.
necessary or something else?
Okay,
Like I don't
are you gonna
understand what.
listen? Are you gonna understand what I'm telling you?
I'm
When you tell
trying.
me that there are these other realms or that there are these other worlds that God exists within, okay, or that the God exists within some sort of external, which is what you're implying here when
I
you
never
invoke
said
this kind of
anything like.
things.
I never said anything like that.
Okay, so
You're
God,
straw manning me.
so there is no, so let's be clear then. Let's be clear. When you talk about God, when I talk about God, okay, particularly the Christian God, we're not going to conceptualize him as though he is yet another um, creature that's subject to things that you may think that us as creatures are subject to. That's not going to be the case. God is foundational. He's ultimate to all of reality and the basis why anything is at all, or can be or
Yeah,
cannot be.
that's fine. But look, the question was very specific. It was you said that there's no brute facts. I said, what is the explanation as to why God had the desire to create the universe with one tree that I'm looking at as opposed to zero or two? And you said um, that it's not chance. So I'm asking the question, is God's desire to create the tree there as opposed to not create the tree? They're necessary, i.e., that it can't have been any other way. Or could God have changed his desire somehow? Like, what
No,
explains the desire?
God does not change his desires.
So it's
Okay.
necessary? His desires are
The
necessary.
I would hold I'm holding to I'm closer to a position of necessitarian when it comes to the result of God's action. Okay, that when it comes to the fact that there is a tree in the forest, or how many trees are in the forest, that the amount of trees that are there necessarily are there. That's a position that I am leaning towards,
Okay.
but
Yeah, I mean, that's what.
that's not a statement about that doesn't necessarily equate to God in all circumstances necessarily.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so I mean, I think that position entails necessitarianism. I think. Wait, sorry, you said you were a necessitarian?
That's the position I'm leaning towards.
Okay, yeah, sure. I think a lot of Muslims hold that position as well. Um, I also wanted to ask you one question, then I probably got to go. Do you think there's a contradiction entailed in saying that physical material exists and God doesn't exist?
Physical material.
Yeah, do you think there's a contradiction in saying that physical material exists and God doesn't exist?
Yeah, well, you're not invoking any sort of ultimate, are you?
I'm just saying that there are physical material. Let's just say a rock, right? There's a world in
Yeah,
which a
in
rock
such a world,
exists
yeah, you can't.
and
Yeah,
nothing
so
else exists.
if there's nothing that's foundational and ultimate, okay, that is revelatory, and the other properties of the Christian God, then no,
There are no
such a
minds in
worldview
this universe.
would not possibly be invocable because
What?
again, there is not a foundational basis for within which intelligibility can be invoked that can actually be actual
All I'm
because
saying,
what you're talking about is a world wherein there is nothing that is tying any of the facts together. There's no world where you can say that physical material and you can collectivize, you know, what you call physical material into the label of as physical material. There's nothing that you would have a basis by which you could even invoke that kind of a world.
okay. I All I'm saying is that a world in which one rock exists and God doesn't exist does not entail a contradiction. That's all I'm saying, and I'm just wondering if you think it does entail a contradiction.
Well, you're not able to invoke that world. There's no you're not even able to invoke it. That's not a world that could even be stipulated.
Invoked. There
No.
is a logically possible world in which a rock exists and God doesn't exist. There we go. I just invoked it. What's the contradiction?
No, there's no intelligibility in such a world because there's nothing that's
Of course
foundational
there's
that
no.
would actually tie
Of course there's
it
no
together.
intelligibility. There are
The
no
fact that
minds
you're
in this world.
the fact that you're telling no by intelligibility we're saying that there is an actual foundational parameter or set of parameters that exist wherein it is the actuality of that state of affairs is actually tied to something, that there's something metaphysically primary by which that rock actually is, that it can be called a rock, for example. So for example, if I tell you let's just use the God example. Okay, so when I say that in this world as a Christian, I exist, you exist, the rocks, the trees, the moon, the stars exist. Well, that's only viable. That invocation of that state of affairs is only viable because God exists first, right? So then we exist in a world wherein everything exists because of God. There is a final reference point to those things. So when I can speak about the rocks, the moon, the trees, the stars, etc., then I'm actually talking about fundamentally what it depends upon. In a world wherein nothing is foundational or ultimate, there is no relationship or connectivity between any facts. So it wouldn't be possible for you to say that such a thing exists without that.
I mean,
That
I
rocks
didn't hear a
exist without that.
contradiction there, so I think my claim holds that there's no contradiction. But
No, there's no rocks to speak of. There would be no trees
no,
to
there is
speak
a
of. There would
rock.
be no grass to speak of.
No, there
No,
is.
you're saying rock, but
No,
I'm
there's no
saying it
grass.
when
There's
you
a
actually
rock. There's just one.
when you
There's
investigate
just
the
one
world
rock,
when you
and
investigate the
no,
world when you investigate the world that you're talking about to invoke physical material, to invoke any sort of material at all without the foundational reference point of that which is ultimate, then no, because you're invoking relationships without there being a basis for relationships between any state of affairs. You're invoking particular things and groups of things without there being any basis for those kind of things. So you wouldn't be able to invoke a rock in such a world. It's only because you exist within a world that God does exist and that you can actually invoke these things that you're trying to posit the hypothetical wherein God doesn't exist and these things still exist. But in reality, those things would not exist. That world would
look,
not exist.
there are no minds in this world. It's just a
That's
rock.
irrelevant. I'm not talking about a mind. We're talking about the fact that the state of affairs itself possesses intelligibility. And by intelligibility, we're saying that there is a ultimate state of affairs or an ultimate reference point for everything that does exist.
Is there a contradiction there?
Yeah, I think I explained it. What we're not talking, or sorry, the world that you're
What's to
talking about
be and not
could
be?
the world you're talking about could only exist in a world where there's something foundational and ultimate, because you're invoking relationships between facts, wherein relationships are not grounded by anything, so that there would be no relationships. Everything would just be spontaneous and out of chance. But you are invoking
So,
things as though they're not.
are you saying the contradiction is there is something fundamental and there isn't something fundamental?
Your invocation of any state of affairs presupposes that there's something that's fundamental, that's revelatory, that has all the properties of the Christian God, and it doesn't.
Yeah, I'm denying that exists in this logically possible
Yeah,
world.
so then you have no basis then to invoke that those things exist, because any invocation of
All
fact
I'm saying is that it's
depends upon the
possible.
Christian God.
All I'm saying is
No,
that
because
it's
again, I'm
logically
explaining to you
possible.
any invocation of facts depends upon the Christian God.
Look, I'm using the classical laws of logic, right? Now, if you want to
Did you not
deny the
understand what I
classical
said,
laws,
Billy?
give me a second, Jay. So,
Did you
um,
understand? I want to make sure we're clear here before we move on. Did you understand what I said?
maybe not really, but
Okay, then I have to explain it,
it just
because then
seems
if you're
like
going to just go on, without actually understanding what I said, then there's no point in why are you speaking? Because you didn't understand what I said, so you're not actually responding to what I said. Okay?
it just seems
I'm going
like
to
you're
make this
not
clear again.
responding to what I'm saying because I'm asking you a factual question.
Whenever a state of affairs, whenever a fact is invoked, whenever it is stipulated to be real, what is also invoked is the preconditions for those things. Okay? Anytime you invoke a fact, you're also going to be invoking things like relationships between facts. Okay? You're going to be invoking unity, you're going to be invoking diversity of things. All of those things presuppose and have as a precondition God being that which is foundational, ultimate, revelatory, always truth revealing, etc. Okay? What you're trying to do is positing a world where these proximate facts exist and possess intelligibility, but God does not exist. Okay? So what you're left with is a world that is out of pure chaos, out of pure brute chance and randomness, out of a metaphysical void, and you're expecting me to accept that you can have rocks and trees and continuity and relationships between facts when you simply don't. There is no basis for that. Such a thing would not exist, and you wouldn't have a basis by which you can't even tell me how you do assume that those things would exist in such a world. But you're just stipulating them as though they do, and I'm telling you that you don't have a basis by which you can even posit that as a hypothetical scenario that would be actual.
Okay. I mean, I got a meeting soon, but I mean, like, can we just get like a vote in the text chat? So one, if you
Yeah,
think
we're not going to
okay,
do this.
let's
We're not
vote
going to do
that.
this. We're not going to do this, Billy. We're not going to do this vote in the text chat thing. Okay. Every time you do that,
I
or if
just
you
want
do
to
that
see.
again, we're not doing this. We're not playing that game. Okay.
Okay. Well, okay, we won't do that. But yeah, I mean, I'm saying that if you understand logically possible worlds as worlds in which all of the facts about that world don't contradict each other, namely that there's no contradiction, right? There's no, like, I'm walking down the street and it's not the case I'm walking down my street. Like, if we understand logically possible worlds like that, which most people do understand logically possible worlds like that, I'm saying that the world in which a rock exists and God does not exist doesn't entail a contradiction. And I don't um I don't think you've demonstrated a contradiction, right? You've talked about, oh
Actually, I,
well,
I already
I
I already
can't.
did. I already
What's the P and
did.
not P? What's the P and not P?
Yeah, that those things do exist and possess intelligibility, and that they don't. You're positing them as though they
Oh,
do, but
okay.
it's entailed that they do not possess intelligibility. That there is nothing that's
Okay, so
foundational and ultimate that's going to secure that those things can actually be invoked.
all right. Well, maybe we might have to continue this later, but okay. So the contradiction. I'm just writing this down in text chat. So the contradiction is, um, the rock possesses intelligibility, and the rock does not possess intelligibility. The rock possesses intelligibility. Intelligibility. So that's the rock possesses intelligibility, and the rock does not possess in. Okay, cool. So there we go. Hopefully my spelling's okay, but the contradiction is the rock possesses intelligibility, and the rock does not possess intelligibility. So could you maybe present an argument as to show
I already did. I already did, Billy.
what's
So
premise one?
that's what I was asking if you understood. You remember when I asked you like 5 times, do you understand what I'm telling you? Okay, because
And
in a
do you
world
remember what
wherein
I
God
said
does
to
not
you?
exist, in a world wherein God does not
Let me
exist,
just
you said you
write
didn't
this.
understand, and then I explained it to you, and then I
Yeah,
just
I'm just
explained it to
writing it
you,
down.
and then
I'm
and then
just
you asked me again for the contradiction when I've made
sure.
it clear
I'm just
about
writing.
half a dozen
I'm just
times.
writing it down. So premise one is in a world where God doesn't exist. So this is premise one. In a world where God doesn't exist, what's the rest of it?
What do you mean in the world? I didn't. What are you talking about? What are you asking me?
I asked you for premise one, and you started saying in a world where God doesn't exist.
We're talking about the
So
fact that you don't understand. We're talking about the fact that you don't seem to understand the fact that God is required for intelligibility, and the world wherein you uh, are saying that these
okay,
rocks exist, that there is no intelligibility.
okay. So what's okay? So look, let's just recapitulate. We got the contradiction, which is the rock possesses intelligibility and the rock does not possess intelligibility. So I'm asking you for the argument that shows that contradiction. So what's premise one?
Okay, I'll make this clear one last time.
So premise one is okay.
When you invoke, we're not. Listen, Billy. I'm going to mute you in a second. You're not going to play this game, okay? In a world wherein we're talking about the facts that are stipulated to exist, facts that are proximate or facts that are temporal facts, okay? Every time you invoke a fact, every time you invoke a fact,
so it's just
every time you invoke a fact of that nature, you're going to be invoking what is required for that. Okay? In this case, we're talking about something being foundational, something that's being found, something that's ultimate, that is going to secure all states of affairs. Okay? So
in a world where facts
don't listen, I'm speaking. Why are you talking when I'm speaking?
Because I'm trying to write it down.
So I'll wait until you're I'm just gonna wait until you're done talking.
Okay, cool.
So in a world
where I thought you were gonna wait until I was done.
Okay, I don't know if this is how y'all normally do it, but I'm trying to hear what the brother's saying, and I can't really pay attention if you keep mimicking everything he's saying after he's saying it.
Yeah, because it's a trolling tactic. That's what it is, and I've gotten impatient with it. Okay, so for the benefit of the audience, I'll be clear again. Okay, just for the benefit of the audience, when you're invoking a fact, when you say, okay, the rock exists, there's physical matter, okay, in the world, there's anything at all, okay, what you're going to be doing, you're going to be saying that there is a relationship between facts. Okay, you're invoking that you can even utter the sentence that the sentence is coherent, right? Additionally, what you're doing is you're invoking unity, you're invoking diversity of things, you're invoking, even if you're invoking just one thing and you're labeling it as a rock, well, what you're doing is you're taking it from a class of things that you're calling rocks, and because there's a commonality between certain things, and because you conceptualize a rock as always a member of a class of things that you call rock, that you can even call it a rock. Okay, let me say that again. The reason, or the fact that you're calling it a rock presupposes that there is a class of things called rock, or there's a group of objects that you conceptualize as rocks that you call rocks, that you can now invoke a singular object as a rock. Okay, that there's a relationship between those things. Okay, ultimately speaking, okay, you're going to be invoking a world as though there is a coherence, that there's an order, that there are relationships, again, as I keep saying, between facts. Okay, that there is a coherence between facts, and that you can invoke many things, and that those things have coherence between them. Okay, if you're doing that, again, you're going to be accounting, or you're going to have to account for the preconditions of those things. And if you're doing that, if you're accounting for the preconditions of those things, the precondition for that needs to be that there's something that's foundational that those things depend upon. Otherwise, if that's not the case, what you're talking about is a world wherein everything, like ultimately, what's out there is nothingness. It's just a brute, or it's just a like a void, a metaphysical void or metaphysical vacuum, where everything that happens, everything that comes into existence, that could be said to come into existence, I'll say, putatively, is just out of random chance. It's out of brute chance. It's just there is no connectivity between the facts, which would annihilate the ability for rationality, amongst other things, but also for that state of affairs to be actual, because there is no connectivity between anything. You couldn't even be said to have states of affairs in a coherent fashion.
Hey, Goofus, you're an atheist. I don't expect you to say it.